Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. The night, illuminated only by the yellow light of street lamps, hung heavily over the small town. Arthur Walker stood in front of the window of his abandoned house. His eyes were fixed on the old wooden floor of the garden below. The coldness and silence of the moment made him feel as though everything had been lost, as though everything was gone forever. It had been 6 months since he lost his family, but time just wouldn't slow down. The echoes of the past, still, rang inside him, deepening with every passing day. Inside the house, Arthur could feel the traces of the past in every room. The sewing box placed on the edge of the old armchair in the living room, the scattered books in his father's study. Everything seemed like small reminders that kept the house alive, but those memories were now just burdens. He believed that everything that once existed here had vanished along with his loved ones. Emotionally detached, he felt drained. Since that day, the world had started to feel like a very foreign place. Since that day, in every moment, there was a man who had gotten lost, Arthur Walker. Everyone around him told him to grieve, to move on, but no one truly understood what he was feeling. His family had died in a car accident. His mother and father, along with his younger sister, had perished that horrific night. Everything in Arthur's life had suddenly gone dark. In an instant, the meaning of everything had vanished. And whenever he thought about that night, his heart would race once more. He had lost so much that life, no matter how much he wanted it, had been enveloped in a kind of sadness and guilt. He had tried to rebuild his life, but with every step, with every new beginning, something was missing. He wanted to bring back everything he had lost, but what he didn't know was that time had turned it into a wound that could never be healed. Loneliness had grown bigger than ever before. Sometimes he felt like he was lost in the space of time and emptiness. Other times, the guilt was so overwhelming that he didn't feel worthy of anything. He was alone in the house. His phone never rang, and the door was always silent. His friends, colleagues, and acquaintances had told him to relax and move on after some time had passed. But Arthur chose to spend every moment with his losses. Nothing else could compare to them. To only live through the pain, to see the world as though he had been deprived of everything. For him, this had become a kind of escape. He blamed himself and placed the dead at the center of his life. One morning, Arthur decided to leave the town. But leaving, getting lost, and going somewhere wasn't the solution either. When he realized this, his heart shattered like a knife. He felt like he had lost himself once again. There was only one thing left to do: make peace with the life he had lived and accept it. One evening, as Arthur sat alone in the only room of the house, he pulled out an old photograph from his pocket and placed it on the table. The photo was from a past family holiday. His mother and father smiled at the camera, and his little sister jumped happily beside them. They had always been together, always loved each other. But now that photo only brought pain. He couldn't take his eyes off it because he realized that the old happiness was now unreachable. In that moment, he felt like a stranger. The ghost of the past followed him every day. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Arthur dropped the photo from his hand and walked quickly to the door. His mind was racing. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, there was only an envelope. His name was written on it. He quickly closed the door and opened the envelope. Inside was an old letter from a friend he had lost years ago. The letter was from George. "Arthur, I've always remembered you. As time passed, I hoped you would rebuild your life, but no one really understood your pain. But perhaps things can change. Maybe you can heal your wounds too. I've wondered about you for years, and if you feel ready, I can help. You can find me. I'd love to talk again one day." George Arthur's hands trembled as he read the letter. George was his old friend. But years ago, he had made a mistake with that friend, and they had drifted apart. Now George wanted to make up for his old mistakes, but Arthur had always kept his distance. He was afraid. He was afraid because trusting others again meant risking another loss. But maybe this was the turning point of his life. Could he really change? Could he get past the losses and regrets in his life? Did this letter offer him a chance, or would he lose again? Gripping the letter tightly, Arthur looked out the window, realizing how terrifying it was to take a new step. After putting the letter in his pocket, Arthur sat by the window for hours. Outside, the fine rain silently enveloped every corner of the town, but the turmoil inside him wouldn't quiet down. The questions the letter brought continued to swirl in his mind. George, his old friend, the friend who had disappeared years ago. This letter from him had reopened the door to the past that Arthur had buried for years. Now, was it right to open that door again, to give life to what had been lost? As his mind shifted between the lost years, regrets, and forgotten friendships, he sat silently for a while longer. He was alone in the house. When faced with the cold and heavy memories of the past, he once again realized how empty and meaningless everything in his life seemed. Time had become an increasingly painful burden. For Arthur, no matter how hard he tried to look forward, the shadow of the past always followed him. At one point his eyes blurred, and he noticed the letter had come out of his pocket again. This time he examined it more carefully. The few lines written by George were not just a reminder of a friendship, but also a signal that the time had come for him to undergo change. He thought that perhaps the only way to heal the emptiness inside him, the years of lingering guilt, and the lost meaning was by doing something differently. Maybe by confronting the past properly. Facing the deep scars the past had left on him would be difficult, but he felt that this journey was necessary for him to find peace. Could every step, every decision free him from the past? Could he rebuild his life with someone else's guidance? Finally, taking a deep breath, he read the letter again. George hadn't asked for help, but he had suggested a path. Maybe something can change, George had written. Arthur read that line once more. Could he really change? If this loneliness he had carried for years came to an end, could he learn to love himself again? For more than a week, Arthur thought, worried, and went through the pain of his regrets. But one morning, with firm resolve, he decided to find George. The time had come to start his inner journey. He had to clear the past, face his old friend again. He needed to forgive himself. George's town was about 2 hours away from Arthur's. It was a small town, in a village that seemed abandoned. Before getting into his car and driving off, Arthur took one last look at his house. This might be the last time. Everything in the house was a reflection of the past, of the losses, but this house had been the cage that had trapped him for years. He felt it was time to step out of the cage, to break free from the chains of the past. The journey was a sort of purification process for Arthur. From time to time, his eyes would wander, lost in thoughts rather than focusing on the quickly passing scenery. As he moved slowly forward, he felt the emptiness within him, but at the same time he dared to take another step. This journey wasn't just to George, it was also a journey toward himself. Before reaching George's town, Arthur stopped several times to take deep breaths. Once he drove into the town, he began to move down a narrow street. The old stone houses around him with their worn walls and history caught his attention. Everything seemed old and abandoned, just like himself. Eventually, he arrived at George's house. The house looked a bit more well-kept than the others. When he knocked on the door, his heart began to race. Seeing an old friend after so many years, recalling the past, it had to be hard. When the door opened, he saw a tall man with a dirty white beard, a little older but still a familiar face. George looked at him like an old friend he hadn't seen in years. "Arthur," George said, his eyes wide with deep surprise. "To see you here after all these years. I've wondered about you so much." Arthur for a moment didn't know what to say. He felt trapped by the weight of the past. But then, something changed. Taking a deep breath, he fixed his eyes on George. "I want to talk to you. I have a lot to say. I'm here to face the past." George nodded slightly. Talking about the past isn't easy, but maybe it's time. As they sat down in their homes, a silence prevailed in the room. Arthur was struggling with the weight of everything he had kept inside for years. As he spoke, he realized the pain and losses he had suppressed for so long. But George didn't leave him alone. He listened patiently, trying to understand every word. And at that moment, for Arthur, it was the beginning of a true confrontation with the past. Facing the losses in his life, the guilt, and his entire past would allow him to be reborn. As Arthur sat quietly in George's house, the weight inside him grew heavier, and with time, it turned into deeper despair. With each passing second, he searched for answers to the questions he had avoided for years. George's presence was the only light on this dark journey, but Arthur still didn't feel ready. The fears, regrets, and losses of the past followed him like shadows. Yet somehow he knew this confrontation was necessary. It would free him from his past and move him one step forward. George noticed the emptiness in Arthur's eyes. He remembered the days when they had spent together, the shared pains and joys. Back then, everything had been so simple and pure. But now everything had become complicated. Life had left deep marks on both of them. The truth couldn't rise to the surface so easily. But some search was there, and George was ready to help Arthur fill this emptiness. "If you want to talk, I'm here," George said slowly but firmly. "But remember, things like this take time. You can't change the past, Arthur. But running away from it won't heal you either." Arthur took a deep breath. He had tried to deceive himself for years. It was then that he realized that truly running from the past had only created more loneliness each passing day. Confronting the truth, though hard to accept, was what he needed. He needed to free himself from the chains of the past. "After the days I spent with you, George, so much has changed in my life," Arthur said, his voice filled with deep sorrow. I lost everything, my family, my job, my friends, but most of all, I lost you. I buried many things because I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't even confess it to myself, but the weight of those losses, even today, it crushes my soul. I'm so lonely, everything feels so heavy. All these years I've gotten more and more lost." George tilted his head slightly. He understood every word Arthur was saying. People like him carry the pains of the past, but at the right time, those burdens must be let go. Confrontation could heal a person, but there was a price to pay. Which wound was deeper? He couldn't know. "Am I hearing this for the first time?" George asked, searching for meaning in Arthur's eyes. "Has this pain you've kept inside eaten you up for all these years?" Arthur shook his head. "Yes, but it's not just about my losses, George. Guilt. I feel so guilty. How distant I was from my family, how far I drifted from you. Everything changed because of me. It was hard to accept that our relationship ended. I couldn't say it because I didn't want to lose you. But now I'm here, and this emptiness inside me isn't filling. I should have shared this emptiness with you." George listened silently. Arthur's words carried a heavy burden. Even after all this time, he still remembered the moments they had shared. Their friendship had once been so deep, and even after years, George continued to understand Arthur. But Arthur's loneliness had left deep scars on his soul. Changing this wouldn't be easy for either of them. "Guilt? Yes, I understand that," George said. "But don't forget, you can't change the past. Everyone chooses their own path. Sometimes we make wrong decisions, but in the end, we have to make our own inner journey. That means finding a way to forgive yourself. But to find that way, you first have to face your past." Arthur tried to deeply grasp the meaning of George's words. The feeling of guilt pierced through him like an arrow, but maybe this was the right way. Confronting, forgiving, and accepting. Making peace with the pains of the past could not only change a person, but could change their life. And perhaps erasing the traces of the past could make him a stronger person. But how would he begin? "How will I do this, George?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Can something change? Can I really be forgiven?" George took a deep breath before responding. "It's in your hands. Forgiving the past starts with forgiving yourself. You must accept the harm you've done to yourself, but at the same time, you must move forward by learning from those mistakes. The past can make you stronger. Just accept taking the right step, George said. Arthur weighed George's words in his mind. Forgiving himself. No matter how hard it was, he had to move forward on this path. He wanted to reunite with the friend he had lost, erase the past, and make a fresh start. But in that moment, he realized he had to confront the pain of the past. They remained silent for a while longer. The sound of rain echoed through the house. George looked at Arthur and smiled faintly. At that moment, being together again after so many years and sharing the burden of the past had meaning. Arthur felt that he could carry this burden and start anew. Finally, he slowly stood up. "George, thank you," he said. "You gave me the courage to do this. Maybe this is the first right thing I've done in my life." George nodded at him with a soft gaze. "You should do this. Finding the right path, forgiving yourself, is in your hands. But remember, everything begins with a single step." Arthur began to feel an inner peace. Maybe confronting the past would finally give him true freedom. To forgive, to free himself from the burdens of the past, and to regain control of his life. For him, this meant being reborn. He had taken a step. Now everything else would just take time. After hearing George's words, Arthur started to feel as if he had been reborn. The pain he had carried inside for years was now a little lighter. Yet, there was still an emptiness in his heart. Something deep was missing. The steps he would take toward self-forgiveness were not only confronting the burdens of the past, but also facing himself. He knew that confrontations could make a person stronger, but they could also be painful. Everything needed to begin again, but how that would happen was still unclear. The few days he spent at George's house had given him the chance to confront his past. After those moments, he decided to illuminate the dark spot within him with light. His greatest goal was not to forget the past, but to make peace with it. But he realized that to do so, he had to deal with the other losses in his life. In order to lighten the burdens of the past, he needed to rebuild something after those losses. One morning, while having breakfast with George offered a suggestion. "Maybe you should focus a little more on the past and do something about your losses," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "You lost your family and you still live with their memories. Honoring those memories might help you heal even more." Arthur thought about what George had said. A thought that had never crossed his mind gave him a new perspective. After losing his family, he had always had to take a step back. Forgetting them or suppressing these losses had given him temporary peace. But now, with George's suggestion, he thought that facing his losses and taking a step toward them might bring him inner peace. "How can I honor them?" Arthur asked with a bit of hesitation. "Is there a way to do that?" George smiled. "Maybe the losses are what brought you here today. Remembering them might help everything you lost gain meaning. Maybe you could open an old photo album, write a memory, or even start a charity. These things will help you remember what you've lost. So even though you've lost them, you can still keep them alive." Arthur pondered George's words. He remembered a series of special moments with his family. Morning walks with his father, his mother's meals in the kitchen, and the laughter he shared with his sister. Those moments had left deep marks in the past, but he had tried to forget them for many years. With George's suggestion, instead of getting lost in those memories, he began to think about reconnecting with them. "Yes, I think you're right," Arthur said, as if making a decision. "I shouldn't forget them. By holding on to their memories, I can create a change within myself." The next morning, Arthur took the old photo album and sat in the quiet room of George's house. The album was dusty, but each page was a treasure to him. The photos carried vivid memories of the old days, smiles, family meals, vacation moments, and pictures of little Arthur joyfully carried on his father's shoulder. They were just memories, but something within Arthur began to change. Each photo was a step in his quest to rediscover everything he had lost. A photo caught his attention. A summer evening when he posed with his family, smiling. This photo had always held a special place in his heart because in that moment, He had never felt so peaceful in his life. After that day, a disconnect had started between him and his family. There had always been something missing back then, but now this photo reminded him of how simple and beautiful everything truly was. "Yes, I lost you, but I never forgot you," he whispered to himself. For a week, Arthur examined the album every day, reading old notebooks and letters. He remembered everything about his family again. One day he shared his thoughts about the photos with George. "I feel like the emptiness inside me has been filled a little," he said, "but I still have to confront the responsibilities that the past has placed on me." George listened attentively to what Arthur said. "This is a very important step. Confronting your loss will rebuild you internally. But remember, making peace with your past isn't just about the memories. You also need to shape your steps for the future. Slowly but surely, try to erase the traces of your losses." Arthur deeply agreed with George's words. There were things he had to do to leave the burdens of the past behind and redirect his life. At that moment, he decided he wouldn't just remember those losses, he would also start creating something inspired by their memories. Together with George, Arthur decided to start a foundation. He wanted to honor his family's memory with a purpose they would have supported if they were still alive, something that would touch people. A foundation seemed like the best way to show respect for his losses. In the future, he could do something meaningful that would keep those losses alive. Laying the foundation gave him strength. Reviving his family's memories and honoring the lives they had lost gave Arthur more courage on his path to self-forgiveness, because every step allowed him to leave the pain of the past behind and move forward. A week later, he had started the necessary procedures to establish the foundation. This journey he was taking to find his inner peace was not only giving him strength, but also adding meaning to his losses. He was starting to shed the guilt the past had burdened him with. And at that moment, Arthur was finally truly reborn. As Arthur made his way step by step through the foundation's setup process, he began to feel that he was slowly freeing himself from the influence of the past and his losses. Each new day felt brighter and more hopeful than the previous one. Gradually, he was accepting the pain he had lived with and transforming that pain into an opportunity to help others. The loss of his family had loomed over him like a dark cloud, but now that darkness had gained meaning. With every step he took toward the future, the silhouette of the past grew farther away. One morning, as he prepared for a meeting about the foundation, Arthur paused and walked toward the window. Life in the city was flowing as usual. People were heading to work, cars were following each other. But in that moment, Arthur thought about how quickly life was passing by. After years of fighting the emptiness inside, he realized everything was moving faster. The more he remembered the past, the faster time seemed to flow, and his losses felt like they had pulled him further back. But now, it was time to leave that speed behind. It was time to walk toward the future, honor the past, and take steps to give his life a new direction. That day, they gathered to organize the foundation's first event. The meeting room was filled with staff and volunteers, each one having experienced similar losses and shared similar pains. As Arthur spoke to them, his heart raced. Many people were listening carefully to what he was saying. They would try to find the meaning of their own losses through his. "This foundation," Arthur said, taking a deep breath, "is not a salvation for us, it's a way to honor. We lost our families, but we are here to keep their memories alive, to express our love and gratitude for them. This foundation is not just for us, but also a respect to those we've lost. Our losses are part of all our stories." Everyone in the room nodded in agreement. At that moment, Arthur realized something. Everything lost actually paved the way for the future. The past had only guided him in one way, but now, with the legacy of the past, it was time to build a new life. At the end of that day, a comprehensive plan had been prepared for the foundation's goals, projects, and events. Arthur felt ready to take on the responsibility of this process. Helping others and touching people's lives was truly healing him. For so long, he had internalized his own pain, but now being able to offer hope to others gave him the opportunity to compensate for his past losses. A few weeks after the foundation was established, Arthur began to feel true peace for the first time in his life. The darkness in his mind was slowly being illuminated. One day he was invited to speak at an event organized by the foundation, where a group of people shared their memories of their losses. This both excited and frightened him. The people there shared stories similar to his, so the event presented an opportunity to connect with them. On the day of the event, as Arthur prepared his speech, he struggled with the emotions inside him. Recalling each memory of his loss caused him pain, but he wanted to give this pain a meaningful context. When he took the stage, his hands slightly trembling, he held the microphone and took a deep breath. Today we are gathered here, not only to share the pain of our losses, but also to come together with the stories of those who have been reborn. We all experienced a loss, an absence, a void. But this void can be filled not only with darkness, but also with light. I too have lost. But these losses have taught me to see everything again, to feel again. As he spoke, Arthur's voice trembled slightly, but he found strength within himself. What brings us together today is not our losses. What unites us is our desire to hold on to life once again, carrying the burdens of the past while taking steps toward the future. That is real healing. His words had a profound impact on everyone in the room. People looked at each other, nodding, tears welling up in their eyes. In that moment, Arthur realized that the meaning of his losses lay not only in the shadow of the past, but also in the construction of a new life. After the event, people approached Arthur and shared their own stories with him. In that moment, Arthur once again understood how the sweet and bitter sides of life intertwine, and how important it is for people to support one another. In those moments, accepting one's own loss, pain, and fear transformed into a unifying force. Arthur, filled with great excitement for the Foundation's future, continued planning upcoming events. For him, each new project was a ray of hope he was adding over his loss. He couldn't fully bring back what he had lost, but he was creating an opportunity to heal something, to help others. One day, while speaking excitedly about the Foundation's success to George asked him a question. What about you, Arthur? Do you feel like you found yourself? Do you have hope for the future? Arthur took a deep breath, smiling faintly. Yes, George, I have hope for the future, because this foundation has not only given meaning to others, but also to me. I find the meaning of my loss by touching the lives of others. And at that moment, Arthur realized the future was every step he took to leave his losses behind and continue adding meaning to his life. The pain and losses of the past had now become a powerful tool for him to guide his life. After years of darkness, Arthur had finally found a light within himself. His loss had taught him pain, loneliness, and a deep emptiness, but it had also led him to discover the strength within to rise again. The Foundation had given his life meaning. It had become the only salvation after his losses. Now, helping others and lightening his own pain by healing others became his new purpose. One morning, while sipping his coffee and reviewing the reports from the Foundation's latest event, Arthur noticed the positive changes reflected in the donations, participation rates, and feedback from the attendees. Helping those in need was offering him not just relief for others, but also a healing process for himself. However, even with all the opportunities the Foundation provided, it had not fully filled the emptiness inside him. Although he accepted this, he realized that this emptiness had, in some way, gained meaning. His losses had shaped him to draw his strength from helping others. One day, after a meeting at the Foundation's office, Arthur noticed something. There was indeed something growing, evolving, and changing, but this change wasn't just external. It was within him too. This was a deep dive into the emotional healing process. All the help he had offered, the hope he had given to others had actually made him stronger. But it wasn't going to be easy to completely cleanse the emptiness inside or free himself from the ghosts of the past. One weekend, Arthur decided to return to his old house. He hadn't been there since the loss of his family. The memories of them still echoed in his mind within the silence of the house. When he stepped inside, it felt like time had stopped. The house hadn't changed. The old couch, the plates in the kitchen, the books in his father's study. Everything was exactly as it had been, yet every corner, every object reminded him of the pain of his loss. Arthur sat down at the kitchen table and took a deep breath. He felt lost within the safe space he had once found in this house, but at the same time he realized how much everything had changed. His family was no longer physically there, but their memories, their love, and the lessons they had taught him were still within him. This both saddened and strengthened him. Every corner of the house was filled with the lessons that would shape his future. Suddenly, a message on his phone caught his attention. It was from one of the foundation's staff. A family that had been helped was going through a devastating loss, and Arthur was asked to intervene directly. At that moment, the silence in the house presented Arthur with a decision. He had come to face the past, but this would also mark the beginning of a new start. For many, facing their losses could be terrifying, but Arthur realized that by facing them, he could truly heal. During the few hours he spent in the house, he felt an inner peace he had never experienced before. The steps he took over his past were not only propelling him forward physically, but also emotionally. He was no longer going to let the past nor his losses control him. The next day, when he went to the foundation's office, he met the family in need. It was clear they had experienced immense trauma. The parents were grieving the loss of their child, and this pain was uniting them. Arthur had a long conversation with them. He explained that loss didn't mean the end, that life continued and that the pain had to be accepted after some time. Although it was a difficult conversation, he was able to offer them hope. From that moment on, Arthur felt a sense of peace inside. Letting go of the pain from his own losses and touching the pain of others gave him a true sense of healing. While the plans for the foundation continued, Arthur reunited with his old friend Patrick, whom he hadn't seen in a while. Patrick understood the impact of Arthur's losses on his emotional healing and had always supported him. During their meeting, Arthur talked to Patrick about the changes in his life. Sometimes, after losses, a person grows, Arthur said. But this growth happens not only by healing ourselves but also by touching others. Our losses are not a burden, they're actually a call to live. Patrick listened appreciatively to his friend's newfound awareness. So, your losses have really made you strong, he said, and this new beginning means building a future in the light of the past. Arthur smiled. Yes, what I've taken from the past has made me stronger. Now, I honor my losses by touching other lives. Over time, the foundation continued to grow. Arthur realized that helping others not only offered a professional journey, but also a personal transformation process. The emptiness inside him, every new day that passed over his losses, was slowly filling up and giving him true meaning. Touching others' lives had guided him in understanding his own losses. Finally, one morning, as Arthur gave a speech at an event organized by the foundation, he once again addressed the crowd. We will never forget our losses, he said, but life continues in some way. True healing happens when we give everything we've lost to others, when we touch their lives. Those we lost are no longer living with us, but we live with their memory. As he finished his speech, Arthur realized that he was no longer letting the past, his losses, and his pain rule over him. The future now looked completely different to him, an opportunity to serve others, open his heart again, and rebuild his life. And once again, Arthur had found his inner peace. He had been reborn with his loss.